Welcome to the Feisworld Podcast, engaging conversations that cross the boundaries between business, art, and the digital world.
It was like really a big street fight to try to live. That I had to start recognizing those thoughts as a way that if I believed I was bad, then I could never come into a room and be hurt. I was ensuring I was controlling my own rejection. So through all of the practices that I've had at Yin Yoga, the trauma program, the recognition that those crazy thoughts are actually trying to protect me, and then coming back in, creating the space in the body through the breath, through the other things I do, there's a way to renegotiate with the nervous system and over time rewire. And so now when the crazy thoughts come, right, on a good day, I can be like, oh, I'm just gonna breathe. Because it's my system telling me something that's very real, but not actually true. Here's a space where I can renegotiate what that discomfort is, where it comes from, what I can do to sort of capacity build when I'm uncomfortable off the mat. It's allowed me to find the other spectrum of joy and happiness and stuff like that, which I never thought possible.
Hello, this is Fei Wu, and welcome to another week of the Feisworld Podcast. Who are we and what do we do? Well, Feisworld is a homegrown podcast designed to interview people who live their interesting and creative lives under the radar. People often ask me where and how I find my guests. They come from all walks of life. Recently, there have been medical doctors, linguists, martial artists, but in the past, they came from Cirque du Soleil, marketing agencies, solopreneurs. I just never know, and I love surprising myself and you, my listeners. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Today on our show, I discovered a woman named Emily Peterson. She is a certified 500-hour yoga instructor, Usui Reiki master, and licensed Timbo facilitator and trainer. Timbo, T-I-M-B-O, stands for Trauma-Informed Mind-Body, which has been instrumental in her own personal healing process. Formerly a competitive athlete, Emily began practicing yoga to manage chronic pain from injuries more than 15 years ago. For Emily, yoga offered an important meditative practice and the experience of a safe connection to her body, which were transformative and led to personal healing from an eating disorder, depression, and trauma. This is a two-part episode hosted by me and my executive producer, Adam Leffert, an avid yoga practitioner who first met Emily and introduced her to me. We had the time to dive deep into Emily's personal stories, the good and not so good times of her life. Storytelling has been a powerful tool for Emily's teaching. It took a while before she could share her trauma as a person who attempted suicide and was sexually abused. I personally know several men and women who have lived through these torturous experiences. I hope this episode opens up doors and possibilities for those who still live in the dark. An unexpected experiment that took place in these episodes are these mini moments where Emily invited us to practice a form of mindfulness meditation with her. It was a powerful experience, even with the recording still turned on. Feisworld Podcast is a self-funded, homegrown podcast created for unsung heroes like Emily and self-made artists who dare to carve out their own path. Without further ado, please welcome Emily Peterson to the Feisworld Podcast. intrigued by your work, by the video that you recorded of yourself. I find that such a vulnerable sort of way to kind of express yourself fully. Right? You really unveiled a lot of things about who you are, including your childhood, including yourself as a very competitive athlete, and the struggles that you went through, which I think are certainly things that many people, and especially women in this world, can really resonate with. And not only you didn't decide to share your story, but you've taken a really big step with yoga teaching, meditation, and also Timbo to really help people around you. So tell us a little bit about maybe your origin stories of kind of where this began and triggered such development.
Sure. So I don't know, I grew up in Southern California and my parents were divorced when I was 1. And so there was a lot of movement and a lot of step parents coming in and out and things and a lot of moving around. And then I was an athlete. I started out as an athlete when I was like 2 or something. I started gymnastics for fun, but became more competitive and then switched to volleyball in 7th or 8th grade, I guess. And during that time, I played for several teams, but one was a very competitive national championship winning team. There were lots of issues. I mean, I feel like a lot of my story is, trauma and stuff, which it is. And I guess that's how I got to where I am. So I guess that's what's coming out now. But it was pretty abusive. I had developed a pretty serious eating disorder. I mentioned in that documentary that they filmed, that there was physical and emotional abuse. Some girls were sexually abused. And then when I got a scholarship to college to play volleyball, a lot of things continued. I had another sort of big crisis around another sexual abuse, and the eating disorder got worse and all of that. So I started becoming hospitalized initially for the eating disorder, and then, I was pretty depressed, pretty suicidal, doing a lot of self-injurious behaviors. So the struggle became just how to stay alive for many years. After I had a huge suicide attempt, which is referenced in the documentary, I think, to which you're referring to, there's sort of 2 things out there about my story. One was a video from Kenya. I sort of had to just figure out how I was going to stay alive. Skipping ahead, I don't know how many years, Timbo came into my world after I became a yoga teacher, and I can go back and double back into why that happened. And Timbo is really the thing that has given me a full life back. And it's my understanding of my purpose of being here on this planet is to sort of be of service to others. And I try to do that in various ways.
I've been in your yoga class. That's kind of what brought us together, yin yoga class. And just to say, among the reasons why I wanted you to be here was the extraordinary experience of being in that class and the warmth and really a subtlety that I think you don't always find with people. Maybe a difference from, as a competitive athlete, there's a sort of explosiveness and this drive. And I have to admit, I'm kind of curious about that. Of course, when you're 2, you don't set yourself up to be a competitive athlete.
Right.
But to get that far, there must have been some sort of an unusual, powerful drive in you. And even the name of your yoga class, yin yoga, brings up images of, the yin and the yang and how those things come together.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I was steered sort of into athletics when I was little. I grew up sort of wanting in my head to be, or my heart to be, a Broadway dancer. And got sort of steered because of what I could do, I guess, into athletics. And there was a huge drive. I mean, and I think looking back, there was sort of multiple reasons for that drive. Not only I loved being active and I loved what I did, but also there was some external pressure. I mean, to perform and I still was probably pretty quiet in that space anyway, even though I was competing on a pretty serious level. And then when I got into doing yoga, I started doing yoga to try and heal from athletic injuries. I had heard that it was helpful for that, and that was 97 or something like that, and that was a year or so, 2 years after my big suicide attempt. So when I started doing yoga, I was still doing it as a competitive athlete. And while it did help my injuries, I was still sort of injuring myself in the process because I was still like, I couldn't really take that out of my identity at the time. But what I was finding simultaneously was these set of practices of breathing and a spiritual side that was starting to open up a new space for me. It's certainly about being in my body. And then when I did my yoga teacher training, it was definitely alignment-based vinyasa. I studied biomechanics, and it was very much like almost me like coaching people through their practices in this sort of go, go, go kind of way. And then I got hurt again. And I was sort of in and out of bed for like 3 days, sort of teaching and going back in bed and teaching, going back in bed. And I had bought Sarah Power's Insight Yoga book, and it was about yin yoga, and she's a Buddhist practitioner also. So I sat there reading it, or lying there reading it, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. It speaks to the Buddhist practices that I do. I'm going to go take a class. And so the first yin class I took, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, this sucks. Like, I actually want to kill this teacher, seriously.
Why is it? Why didn't it jive with you?
I had never been still. I meditated in stillness, which was a different thing. But yin yoga, you actually feel sensations in your body. You have emotions. I had memories. My mind was going crazy. And, we're holding this pose, the dragon, for like 5 minutes, and she's reading a poem or something. And I'm like, shut that up, and I had all this rage, and I was like, this is crazy. Like, what is this? This is something very interesting right now. And then when I got done, I felt awesome. And I was like, okay, there's something here, So I just started practicing more yin, and then I did a training with her. And it was a new door being opened for me in terms of like how I could, one, transform or continue to transform myself into a more balanced person, but also really diving into my relationship with how I controlled my body, how I ignored all of my body's feedback, how I would just sort of plow through whatever it was, disregarding pain and things like that, and to create a space in these 3 to 5 minute shapes where it's like, okay, I feel sensation. What do I do? I used to do things like self-injure and have eating disorder stuff and like, drugs and all of that kind of stuff to get rid of any discomfort that I had. Here's a space where I can renegotiate what that discomfort is, where it comes from, what I can do to sort of capacity build when I'm uncomfortable off the mat. And ultimately, it's really given me like a directly proportional to how much sort of discomfort I can, and not in a suffering sort of way, but it's allowed me to like find the other spectrum of joy and happiness and stuff like that, which I never thought possible.
So 97 was a pretty big year. I remember the number, this year has come up multiple times, and certainly there are many areas of struggles that we have covered to a certain extent. Suicide, eating disorder. We also talk about postpartum depression, but pretty serious ones. So it seems like you are someone who have experienced a lot of them possibly at the same time, but 97 is a time where you said that there was an attempt of suicide. What was happening at the time, and what sort of triggered and drove you to that extreme?
Yeah. 97 was when I started yoga. 96 was the big suicide attempt. So it was last year was my 20-year anniversary of my new life, I guess. I had tried once before and didn't succeed either in that attempt. I just could not see that I could not understand that there was anything about me that was worth continuing to live, and the amount of suffering that I felt that I was causing those around me, just being chronically in and out of the hospital, not being able to move past some of the things that had happened. And I just really believed that those around me would be better off without me there. When people are chronically depressed, it's not as if they're never happy, but I had just lost complete ability to recognize any moments of happiness. And I felt like, well, I'm doing all of these things that are not good for me anyway, that the only way out I could see for the people around me, really, and for myself, was to take my own life.
So I have lost friends to suicide, and that's something that I
could never reconcile and to really never get past as an outsider. And it feels very much like one, because oftentimes you don't see it coming at all. Those people are usually successful, beautiful, travel around the world. And I wonder, there was that in-between time, 96, and so you didn't succeed. I'm very glad that that was the case. But coming out of that, was there any vivid memories of people or events or things that happened, maybe 96 and 97, that perhaps snapped you out of it and made you realize how special and loving that you are and you're capable of? Do you recall any moments?
I mean, a long time after that, it was a street fight. I mean, my doctor, who I cared very much about, told me, and they came to say to my family that I wasn't going to live. I don't know how now this way in which I'm just amazed by the human body, what I did, and I actually did live. But my psychiatrist, my doctor, who I was very close to, came and said to me, he's like, Emily, I can deal with the eating disorder, I can deal with other things. He's like, you try again, if you don't succeed, I can't work with you anymore, So it was that one statement of what happens if I were to do this again and I lived and I lost him, that was not acceptable to me at all. So that was the one thing for a while that sort of kept propelling me to work. And I was like, okay, I'm going to live, so how are we going to do this? But when I got out of the hospital, the weekend that I got out and I was playing semi-pro beach volleyball tournaments. So when I left college, I started playing beach volleyball, and my partner finally found out where I was and when I got out, and she said, Emily, let's go play a tournament in Michigan. Let's get away from where we normally were playing. No one will know us, whatever, let's just go play there. And we got to the semifinals in that tournament, and she had, we had sort of gotten a little bit of a group of people sort of watching, and I think she had told them that I had just gotten out of the hospital. She did not tell them why. So we had this little cheering section, which was super special. And I felt like actually I was going to die playing that, because no, there was nothing. But that was certainly a moment of just oh, okay, people don't know me, but they're kind of getting behind what I'm doing here. And that was just kind of a moment, of okay, well, there's connection. There can be connection out there. But still kind of that was a way in which I was well, if they truly knew who I was, though, they would certainly not feel connected. So it was really really a big street fight to try to live. There was no sort of snapping out of it. There were just sort of motivating factors of why and plus my family at that point, the devastation that I put them through, there was no way I could do that again. So I had to begin working pretty hard to live. Yeah.
Just to say that it's come back around to where, with all the pain and with all the things that we all struggle with, you're that person, I'm sure, for a lot of people that leads other people forward, that people feel like they don't want to disappoint you, that they don't want to leave you behind. So also, I was wondering, we talked about the yoga, and I almost have this, a visual image of these different sort of layers of a person. So one of the things when I came into yoga, there's I hate this, definitely had the hate this feeling, and some of the teachers even say, now put your block down and don't throw it at me.
Yeah.
I just don't want to project it on them for making you hold your dolphin for such a time. But for me, there was that pain, and then there's different kind. Now there's the kind of oh, I hate this now, but I'm going to like it later. Having you as a friend and having other friends who are really professional level challenged with mental illness, go visit them in McLean's for months at a time. The will to live is there, the drive part of which was in your sports is there, the connection to other people, the feeling of disappointment. But what I don't hear in you, and I wonder whether it's there or whether it shifted or got sort of mushed down, is just the wrong idea. Some of my friends who I'm very close to well enough to know that they use their intelligence, but it's crazy, and the crazy argues with the sane, And after some number of years, the crazy does win, even with all the therapy and the pills so I can appreciate the abyss and looking into it and being drawn in. I'm just wondering, like, do you fear of like sitting and doing a podcast is one kind of a little butterfly flutter, or is it all just physical, emotional, sort of juicy life, and you make your way?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I, first of all, one of my switches in my mentality was that everything, right, that I had gone through now became an asset to me. So that was one sort of overarching shift in mentality, that I could move sort of from shame to like be of service because of what I'd gone through, not in spite of. And then concurrent to all of this has been sort of the work that I've done in the trauma program and the studying that I've done around the nervous system, and the understanding that even all of the behaviors and thoughts and all of that, there's this bi-directional way that it's connected to the nervous system of the body. And whether it's a podcast, or whether it's getting up and teaching yoga, or whether it's feeling that I just am not worthy of love and connection, it's the same nervous system running. So how could I begin to then hear the crazy thoughts in my head, which they're not gone, right? I mean, they're still there because they're coming from sensations in my body, to start that way in which I could pause, create space, and be like, okay, this is actually serving me or has served me in the past. So if I walked into any given room thinking, which I used to, that I was a horrible, terrible person, unworthy of love and connection, and even going to the crazy thought of like, if there was an earthquake in China, there was somehow that my innate badness caused that to happen. My therapist used to call it negative grandiosity. That I had to start like recognizing those thoughts as a way that if I believed I was bad, then I could never come into a room and be hurt. I was ensuring I was controlling my own rejection. So if I walk around feeling like, or sitting in those thoughts, which again are coming from sensations in my body, which are linked back into my nervous system, where we have a nervous system where getting kicked out of the cave equals a threat to survival, right? I mean, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, is food and all that, but connection is number one.
Right.
So how do we all do it, adapt in our lives to ensure connection? And at some point it works for us. I was told when I was playing volleyball that I had to keep losing weight, even though I was like whatever, how many pounds. And then some coach said, don't do that anymore. But I was way on my way of like being like, oh, I can control my own pain by not eating, right? So I started off the eating disorder in order to be connected to my coaches. And then over time, that becomes maladaptive because it's not good, right? So if I could start to begin to see the crazy thoughts or hear the crazy thoughts, pause, come back into my body, what's happening in my body right now? And then I've, with the PTSD, is the body telling me something that is true in this moment? No. If I walk in to a podcast with two people that I know, I'm not actually going to die, even though my nervous system is literally telling me that. And all of the thoughts of going, well, I'm comparing myself to XYZ guest. I don't even know why they're bringing me here, right? All of those thoughts are in service of one thing, which is to protect me from being vulnerable. So through all of the practices that I've had at Yin Yoga, the trauma program, the recognition that those crazy thoughts are actually trying to protect me, and then coming back in, creating the space in the body through the breath, through the other things I do, there's a way to renegotiate with the nervous system and over time rewire. And so now when the crazy thoughts come, right, on a good day, I can be like, I'm just going to breathe, because it's my system telling me something that's very real, but not actually true. And I think that one of the reasons why I do what I do with Yin Yoga and then the energy healing practice and then the trauma work, it's like the triangle of this somatic-based healing. I mean, I've been in therapy out the wazoo, which is great. Like, you need that for the mind, but this stuff lives in the body. There's no argument to that now. For me, the healing is back through the body and renegotiating the space in the body. But for a long time, I did everything I could to stay out of the body, so the crazy, in quotes, crazy thoughts, I lived in that space, right? So that's where I lose hope, and that's where I feel like I'm not connected to anyone, and in fact, who in their right mind would ever want to be connected to me?
There's so many, but that's one of the reasons I really wanted to make certain that you were here. Because, I've been to talk therapy, I have a lot of friends that have done that, but there's something you can't reach. I think there's a level where talk sometimes can't reach, but everybody has a body. And even from what you're saying, there's the pleasure, but then there's also the pain, that people have the pain.
Right.
So whichever medicinal modality you subscribe to, whether it's going to give you pimples or give you a headache or, stomach ache, or odd behavior, just trying to block that dam of energy is not going to do it. So you can let the energy keep going, and that the words about it are, this will serve me because I'll be able to connect to other people who have the same drive or the same pressure on them.
No, thank you. And one reason I think that there's only so much that talk therapy can do, right? Again, is because this stuff lives in the body, but in utero, to by the time we even form any cognitive capacity, pre-language, we're running on a nervous system where, again, the threat of survival, or the perceived or real threat of disconnection from your caregivers is a threat to one's survival. So we've all had that. We've all had it. So we all have trauma. Some people have traumatic events, right? Mm-hmm. But being a human being is not about the story. It's not about what we say in our, stories actually in a lot of ways sometimes connect, but also can very much disconnect. If you're like, well, I didn't experience that. I know what it feels like to feel guilt. I know what it feels like to feel shame. And as a little person, we all grow up with this primitive system coding that a threat to our connection to our caregivers, perceived or real, literally is a threat to survival. And then we start to adapt from there. Mm-hmm. Right? Oh, my mom has a bad day. She comes home and yells. Let's say I'm crying and she comes home and yells. Well, my little person brain, that everything is about me, might come up with the conclusion that crying is not good. Crying ensures my disconnection from my mother or in fact anger. I work with a lot of people who come in, they're like, I've never had big T trauma, but I can't feel emotions. I can't allow myself to feel emotions. Whatever reason, this stuff gets coded in our bodies, and then we adapt. And when we're little, it's ingenious for a little person to stop crying to make sure they're not yelled at. But what happens over time?
Hey, it's Fei. I am back for a few words at the end of the show. I hope you enjoy what you heard. You can visit us online at feisworld.com or social channels such as Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, also under Feisworld, to keep things simple. I personally review and respond to all the messages. Love to hear from you. Thank you, and lots of hugs. See you next week.